Welcome to my first drive video on Porsche's Macan GTS. This model has been around for more than 10 years. Porsche tell me you're going to be able to buy this first generation Macan well into 2025. The majority of cars and models tend to have about a 7-year life cycle. Somewhere in between that 7 years, at about the 3.5 or 4 year mark, they have an update, a refresh or a facelift. And this car, being more than 10 years old, well, it's had 2 updates, one in 2019 and one more recently in 2021. There has just been an all-electric second generation Macan launched, but I'm guessing due to lack of interest, Porsche have rightly decided to keep the first generation Macan going alongside the second generation. I think that's the first time that's ever happened with any German manufacturer, and it might be something that we see a bit more of over the next few years. There are 4 versions of the Macan on sale today here in the UK. You've got the base spec Macan, which has a 2-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine straight out the Golf GTI. That retails at £55,000. You then move up to the Macan T, which retains the same engine but has a few extra T-bits, and that's about £60,000. You then move up to the Macan S that has a 2.9 litre V6 in it. That retails at just over £60,000. I believe it's 62 grand. And then you have this flagship Macan GTS, which also has a 2.9 litre V6 twin turbo, albeit one that's been turned up a little bit, and we'll talk about how much it's been turned up in a minute. And this retails base at £73,500. It has got quite a few options on it. In fact, about £15,000 worth of options. 2 of those options we're going to talk about are in fact the 2 most expensive options. The first one being the £2,250 copper ruby metallic paintwork, which looks absolutely stunning. Maybe not on that camera in this light and as dirty as the car is now, but when I picked it up 5 days ago and it was clean, you're hopefully seeing some of the detail shots that I got of it, and it really is lovely. And the other option, which is by far and away the most expensive option on this car, is the £7,600 GTS Sport package. And in that package you get things like these gorgeous 21-inch wheels that are clad with P0 Corsa tyres. It's a good thing and a bad thing. We'll talk more about that when we get it out on the road. You also get the Sports Chrono Pack, Porsche's Torque Vectoring Plus package, and a number of detail changes on the outside and on the inside. I've always liked and appreciated the styling on the Macan. I remember when it was launched all those years ago, back in 2014, I thought to myself, it's definitely a better looking car than its bigger brother, the Cayenne. And although they have made a few tweaks and changes over the years, like we've already talked about, I think in general it's aged really well and still looks fairly modern on the road today. One area that does concern me on a lot of modern performance cars is how exposed some of their radiators are. And this Macan GTS is perhaps the worst of the lot. This is not going to stop any small stones and gravel, let alone anything a bit bigger. If there was a rock the size of my fist bouncing down the road, which you'd hope there wouldn't be, well, it would definitely make its way through here and straight into that radiator, which I'm sure if you had to get that replaced at Porsche would cost you thousands of pounds in labour and parts. And that does concern me, especially if you live here in the UK. Underneath this clamshell style bonnet, we'll find a 2.9 litre V6 twin turbo. It's essentially the same unit that we find in Audi's current RS4, and that's not a bad thing. In this guise, it produces 440 horsepower and 550 newton meters of torque. Unlike the Audi, this runs through Porsche's 7-speed PDK dual clutch gearbox. In the Audi, it's a 8-speed ZF automatic box. And similar to the RS4, it is fed to the ground via all four wheels. Porsche claim this Macan GTS will do the 0 to 60 sprint in just 4.3 seconds, or if you have the Sport Chrono Pack, in just 4.1 seconds. In this video, we're going to figure out whether this aging model is still worth buying today. Jumping inside, and firstly, driving position is spot on. You would expect that in a Porsche, but you maybe wouldn't expect it in a car that's based on a first generation Audi Q5 platform. These 18-way sports seats are hugely comfortable, very supportive and massively adjustable. Although I have to say they are starting to look a little bit old, like a lot of this cabin. In fact, it's a real mix of old and new because it is an old model fundamentally. So when you look up here, well, I think all of these buttons and that section is the same section that came on a 2014 Macan, but then when you get down here where you have got some more modern Porsche switchgear and sort of touchscreen infotainment, once again the dials and stuff are older, and I don't mind that because they're very analog and exactly what I want in my Porsche. You got a modern wheel here that looks and feels fabulous. Lovely little aluminium paddles, buttons where I need there to be buttons that don't get in the way. Got a drive mode down here that gives me individual, normal, sport and sport plus, and if I press it, well, I get a sport response for 20 seconds. It's basically like an overboost function. So if that 440 horsepower, 550 newton meters isn't enough, press that and you get a little bit more. In terms of practicalities, well, I've always underestimated the Macan because I've not spent much time at all in one of these over the past 10 years. But I have to reverse my thinking on that because although from the outside it maybe looks like form over function, it's quite good looking, at least in my eyes, and it's quite compact looking. But when you jump inside, there's plenty of space in here. Plenty of room up front for two large adults, and plenty of room in the back for two large adults. In fact, you could get me behind my driver's seat, which is really impressive. And there's headroom back there. Although, again, it wouldn't look it necessarily on the outside because it looks like there's quite a sloping roofline, but it does the job. One thing I would comment and talk about though is the rear windows are quite small and the rear doors are quite small to get in and out of. And when those rear windows are all the way down, well, they're not all the way down, they only go down about 2/3 of the way, so that might annoy some of your rear seat passengers, whether they're children or adults. And then when you get in the boot, well, once again, it's a lot bigger than I'd given this car credit for. So as a practical family car, I think it does a lot of things really well. Where it falls maybe a little bit short are storage areas. Like this storage bin here in the front is really small. The door bins aren't that big. The glove box isn't that big. The center armrest back there that has cup holders in it is really not that useful or great at all. And I think that center armrest has come right out of an Audi Q5. Doesn't even sit straight. So if you put something in there like a coffee, it would definitely spill. So just bear that in mind. But overall, I think it's a really nice place to sit and be, but it is a real mixture of old and new, but everything works very well. Before we head out on the road, I want to say a quick shout out and thanks to my good friends Louise, Ryan and their beautiful daughter Coco, who were over from Canada recently and gave me this lovely t-shirt. Thanks guys, I really appreciate it. First things first, let's test out this car's claimed acceleration figures. Porsche say it will do the 0 to 60 sprint in just 4.1 seconds, providing it has the Sport Chrono Pack, which this particular press car does because that is part of the very expensive GTS Sport package. My Racebox Mini is now ready to go. I'm going to leave it in drive and let the gearbox do the shifting. I've got the traction stability aid switched off because conditions outside are close to perfect. Left foot is hard down on the brake, right foot on the accelerator. That is 5,000 RPM. Here we go. Oh my goodness. Wow. 3.78 seconds. That is more than 0.3 of a second quicker than Porsche claim. That is so fast, especially the 0 to 30 part, which My Racebox Mini says is 1.26 seconds. Now we know that this is extremely fast, at least in a straight line. What we want to find out next is what it's like to drive around in normal, when everything is knocked back to normal, essentially. Because I reckon the average Macan and even Macan GTS owner spends most of their time in this car cruising around and using it as a daily or as a family car. So when I knock it back into normal, the three-way adaptive suspension softens up into its most comfortable setting. I can override that anytime with a button down here. When it's not lit up, it's in its softest setting. When I press it once, it goes up a level, and when I press it again, it stiffens right up. And you do feel that instantly, but we're going to leave that backed off to start with, and then we'll get to how it feels when we push on a little bit very soon. Ride quality, even though this has massive 21-inch wheels, these wheels are bigger than the wheels that I had on the Porsche Cayenne S recently, which just seems ridiculous because the Cayenne is substantially bigger than this car. So you would assume on 21-inch wheels with very low profile P0 Corsa tyres that the ride might be a little bit harsh on a typical UK road. And I have to say, although I'm sitting here knowing that I'm in an SUV that is maybe towards the performance end of the scale, in terms of ride quality, it's really good. It's been really good to live with. Nobody in the back seat, my good friend Louise, Ryan, or my parents who were in the back yesterday, none of those have complained about ride quality. And to me, as a driver sitting here, well, it flows along a British ALB road really, really well. And that has perhaps been the biggest surprise for me, because I assumed, being labelled as a GTS, that it might be a little bit harsh, like the 992 GTS is. For me, that is just too hard-edged for a UK sports car, and that's why I kind of prefer the regular sort of base level 911. It's a bit softer sprung and works much better on a UK road. This car in normal works really well. You barely hear that 2.9 V6. Once again, there is an exhaust button down here that you can press to make it a little bit louder, but that's not the point. You kind of want the normal mode to be nice and chilled and relaxed. When it changes down a couple of gears, you can just about hear that V6 note spark into life, but it does everything really, really well. Steering feel is great, especially for an SUV, and I'm sure that Porsche's wonderful thin rim on this steering wheel definitely helps with that. Sound insulation's good. Yeah, I'm sat here happy running around in this car, as I have been for the last 5 days, using it as my daily. Right, let's see what this car's like at the other end of the scale. To do that, I'm going to go down to my drive mode here and turn it clockwise. Once gives me sport, again gives me sport plus. It's revving way too hard. So to rectify that, I'll pull this right paddle and it will give me manual override, but that won't last. It will go back into drive. And it took me ages to find and figure out how to permanently put it into manual override. And I'm sure if anyone owns a facelifted or a second facelifted Macan, they will know, but I didn't, and I eventually found it. There's a tiny button on the wheel here that has an M with a minus and plus next to it. If I press that, then it gives me full manual override of the 7-speed dual clutch gearbox. And now when I pull these paddles, either way, I get very fast gear shifts, and the car will keep it, or the gearbox will keep it in the gear that I want to be in. So I'm currently in third, pull the paddle, and I'm into fourth. So now I've got everything essentially turned right up. Something I want to knock back a little bit is the suspension. And that's not because it's overly uncomfortable or stiff, but I find even when you're pushing on in this car on a UK road, when it's in its hardest setting, it can skip a little bit across the surface. So if I go down here to where there's now 2 lights telling me that it's in its stiffest setting, if I hit that once, it puts it in its softest, hit it again, and now I'm in the middle setting. Before we talk about handling, let's talk about that 2.9 litre V6 twin turbo. We know it's punchy, we know it's powerful, we know it propels this car from 0 to 60 in well under 4 seconds. But what's it like otherwise? Well, for anyone that's watched any of my B9 RS4 videos, you'll know that I'm a big fan of that engine. It has loads of torque everywhere, and it rewards you when you do rev it out. It also sounds pretty good, but not amazing. It's a little bit gruff in between about 4 and 5,000 RPM. I'll demonstrate that now. So let's slow things down. Let's put it in second, in fact. At 2,500 RPM, sounds pretty good. 3,000, 4,000, 4 to 5, not great. Then up high, pretty good. Oh, mated to that dual clutch box. The shifts are just unreal. You get a few little pops and cracks on the overrun as well. Yeah, the motor is very quick. Definitely feels more powerful than the 440 horsepower that Porsche claim, and we all know that Stuttgart horses are a better breed than many others, but we also know that that is not necessarily a Stuttgart motor. It's an Audi motor, and that feels every bit as good as any RS4 motor that I've felt before. So it has plenty of go. It definitely has enough. And in fact, there is no Macan turbo anymore, but the old Macan turbo, off memory, had about the same power and torque output as this Macan GTS. So it was no faster than this car. Brakes, really, really good, as you'd expect in any Porsche. You do have to apply a lot of pressure to get maximum stopping power, and that sometimes takes a little bit of time to get used to, but once you are used to it, it's brilliant, because you essentially end up with a lot more brake feel and brake pedal feel than you would in many other cars and manufacturers. Now let's get on to talking about this car's handling. Remember, we're on the P0 Corsa, which in my head at least is essentially a semi-track focused tyre, and one that you've got to be very careful with when it starts to rain and there's standing water. So if you have a Macan GTS or anything with P0 Corsas on it and you're going into the winter months, just beware, because they do not operate in temperatures below 7-8 degrees, and they don't work well when there's standing water. As I discovered about 2 days ago, I was on a motorway and it really started to rain. The heavens open and there was standing water everywhere, and suddenly at 60-65 miles an hour this car started to aquaplane. I had to drop to about 50 miles an hour to make sure that I wasn't going to spin out of control and crash this lovely press car. So just beware of that if you are on P0 Corsas or tyres like Michelin's Cup 2. As brilliant as they are in these sort of conditions, once the winter months roll in, doesn't matter if you've got four-wheel drive or all the traction aids in the world, they're not designed to work in really cold, really wet conditions. Anyway, today thankfully is lovely and dry. Let's push it through these turns that we've got coming up and talk you through it, because I think it's absolutely brilliant, this car. Change down into third, turn it in, loads of steering feel. Into second, it gives me second because that gearbox is brilliant. Floor it out of there and I can actually feel it rotating mid-corner. I've got all the traction aids, etc. switched off, so that is helping. but I'm sure that fancy torque vectoring thing that comes as part of that GTS Sport package is definitely helping. The long and short of it is that this car is really engaging and fun to drive when you start pushing it. If you had this car as your daily, as your family car, you would get up on a Sunday morning to take it out for a fun drive, because it is brilliant. It really is. And I wasn't expecting that. I know it's a Porsche, I know it has a GTS badge on it, but I wasn't expecting the levels of engagement that this car gives me. It is brilliant. And like so many brilliant fast cars, they're just too fast to enjoy on a UK road. They really are. This car is so quick, point to point, and I'm sure in every type of weather, if you had some PS4Ss on it, really is good, and it puts a smile on your face, which is really, really important, and maybe something I wasn't expecting. To conclude and answer my question in the initial intro, is this first generation Macan worth considering and buying today, more than 10 years after it was initially launched? Well, the short answer is yes, it is a brilliant piece of kit. This GTS seems to do so many things in one package. It is practical, it is comfortable, it does your daily duties in normal really well, almost better than I was expecting. And when you ramp it up into Sport Plus, well, it turns into an absolute animal, all the while being engaging and fun to drive. Once again, something I wasn't necessarily expecting. Something else we need to do is compare this car to other similar price packages that are on sale today. And there's a couple of cars that spring to mind, and top of that list is Audi's RS4. We've already talked about the RS4 today because they share the same engine, and in fact a base spec RS4 is about £72,000, so almost identically priced to this Macan GTS. Same performance, very similar practicality, and if I had the choice, I really wouldn't know which way to go. Before I got my hands on this Macan GTS, I would have definitely gone with the RS4, but after spending a few days in this car, I've realised that it's so good at doing so many things, and that includes the dynamic driving aspect, and I would have assumed the RS4 would definitely have been more engaging, but it's not. So if you're looking at getting both cars, well, good luck to you, because it's definitely a tough decision, and I wouldn't say there's any right or wrong way. Another car that's very close to my heart is the M3 Touring, and although on paper it is 10-12 grand more expensive than this, we all know that you get relatively good deals on BMWs, I'm sure, compared to Porsche products. And also the M3 Touring comes with more standard equipment, so if you're looking at getting a Macan GTS of a similar spec to this car, well, you're in or at M3 Touring money. And I have to say, in terms of performance and dynamic driving, the M3 Touring is a step above. But in terms of using it as a daily and ride quality, the Macan GTS is a step above. You also have the benefit of sitting a little bit higher, and when you're going down a typical A or B road like this one, you can see a bit further down the road as a result. Or even when you're on the motorway, there's a pile up in front of you or there's cars braking, you can see a little bit further. So it does have its benefits. Although I love sitting nice and low in my M3 Touring, there's no denying that when you do sit a bit higher, like in this car, you can see more of what's going on. And as you get a bit older, like me, getting in and out of a car like this with fairly normal seats in comparison to my carbon buckets, well, it's definitely a lot easier. The bottom line is, I've really enjoyed my time with this Macan GTS, and I'm glad that Porsche continued to sell it more than 10 years after it was initially launched. I think they really need to continue to sell it, because as we all know, EV sales are not the best, and with the second generation Macan being electric only, well, Porsche have almost been forced into keeping this model going. I hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. Please stay tuned for another one coming very soon. Until then, take it easy, and I'll speak to you soon. Cheers.